Jeff Harrison serves as a senior counsel at Combest and Sell and Associates. Jeff leads the firm in developing and implementing legislative and regulatory strategies, building coalitions, and promoting client priorities. Jeff has had a hand in crafting, in some way or another, every major agricultural statute in the last 25 years. Prior to joining CS&A in 2005, Jeff served 13 years on Capitol Hill as a legislative director in the U.S. Senate and as counsel for the House Committee on Agriculture, where he was the lead counsel on the Agricultural Risk Protection Act of 2000, plus numerous titles to the 2002 Farm Bill, including commodities and crop insurance. A native of Bluffton, Minnesota, Bluffton is located in Otter Tail County, just down the road. Jeff graduated with distinction from the University of North Dakota Law School, where he also earned his undergraduate degree. Jeff also clerked for the Honorable Paul A. Magnuson, the Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court of the District of Minnesota, where he was sworn in to the Minnesota State and the federal bar. Jeff, welcome to Bean Day 2025.
Good afternoon. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. And I got to say that the speaker, Heather and Anne-Marie, I think, that was really an important message that they had, just because, you know, just working in D.C. and seeing all the misinformation relative to food and health, it's really important to get to young people early on to form, you know, their judgment and give them the right information to make good decisions about things like that when they get older. There's an old saying that a lie makes itself halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes laced. And so, you know, certainly in the discussions about food policy, agriculture policy, we need to make for certain that young people get that right early on. The gentleman who introduced me has got such a great voice. I'm just going to say just a couple things about where I come from. So Bluffton, Minnesota, I was talking to Bob. Bob's from 20 miles down the road from me, from Perham. And it's a very German Catholic area. So for those of you who are from North Dakota, it would be sort of like Napoleon. And for those of you, I'm going to challenge you guys to see how many of you are old enough to remember Ben Meyer, the longest serving Secretary of State, who hails from the state of North Dakota. And he is from Napoleon, and he always spoke with a big, thick German accent. And he would answer his own telephone and attend all the weddings and all the funerals. And he'd always speak to everybody, and he'd say, "My name is Ben Meyer, and I don't represent the Republicans, and I don't represent the Democrats, I represent the state as a whole." And I got to say, so I've got now a 91-year-old mother living, she doesn't live in Bluffton anymore just because it needs to live a little closer into some of the stores and so forth. So she lives in Wadena. And when John Berthold was taking me around to meet some of the farmers over by the Park Rapids area, Osage area, I ran into one young farmer, and it turns out that he is the son-in-law, or actually his grandfather by marriage. John Conzemius was my coach back when I was growing up, and I was visiting with my 91-year-old mom, and I asked her what she had going on that day, or that week, and she said she was going to go to the senior center and play cards. And I said, "Well, who do you play with?" And she told me who she played with, and the last person on the list was John Conzemius, who was my coach. And I said, "Well, please, you know, say hi to Mr. Conzemius for me, because, you know, he was a great guy and a good man." And she said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't do that." And I was like, "Well, why on earth not?" And she said, "Well, because then they're going to want to know what you do for a living, and lawyer lobbyists are not very popular at the senior center." All right, so thanks for indulging me on that. That's my whole Otter Tail County background. So I'm going to try to give you some meat and potatoes. If I promise you, if you're paying attention, you'll have a really good roadmap of what to expect for 2025. And I'm just going to kind of try to go through this pretty fast, because I recognize I've got a limited time here. So economic aid that was passed in December, basically those checks are required by statute. That $10 billion is required to go out by March the 21st. When I visited with the Farm Service Agency, the career official that's running the agency right now until a new FSA administrator comes in, he says that they're going to meet that deadline, that they will meet that deadline of March 21. The pay limit, or pardon me, the pay structure is very structured. It's very prescriptive in law. It basically compares the prices that producers are receiving for mostly marketing loan eligible crops, compares the price that you're getting against basically your cost of production. And because for so many crops you're underwater and the costs are greater than the price, you're going to get a payment that's reflective of the difference. But it's going to be multiplied by a factor, I think, of 0.28, just simply because of trying to keep it within budget. Your pay limit would be $125,000, but if you have 75% of your income or more coming from farming, then that's going to jump to $250,000. Again, most all marketing loan eligible crops, that works out to be about $43 per acre for corn, $29 for soybeans. North Dakota and Minnesota, by the way, are the 5th and 7th largest state beneficiaries in the country out of the 50 states. I have to say, we were really hoping to get $20 billion for this program, and we had hoped to expand it beyond just the PLC ARC eligible crops to provide a flat rate payment. For some of you guys remember the CFAP program, we were hoping to do a $25 acre payment, but when they shaved it back to $10 billion, that became difficult to achieve. We have a one-pager on it if it's helpful, and you may have read already more than you care to read on this topic, but if you want a one-pager, my email address is jeff@combest-cell.com, and if you email me, I'll send that to you, and we'll kind of keep you posted as the program develops. But by and large, my key message to you on the economic relief is that you can be pretty certain about that. There's not much that USDA can do to screw that up. And then in terms of disaster aid, this is an historic amount of money, almost $21 billion in disaster aid. And you're probably thinking to yourself, largely 23 and 24 have been generally probably pretty good production years in Minnesota and North Dakota. But when I've talked to crop insurance agents, they'll tell me that, I was just visiting with some of them here not too long ago, and they were saying that 80% of their policies will have some sort of claim in those years. So you might be surprised that basically that you will get a benefit under this disaster program. And mind you, that even if you don't have a crop insurance claim, if you have a crop loss, even if it's a shallow loss, there's still a disaster benefit that's available to you under the program. The statute, the law itself, looks a lot like the previous laws that have been done for disaster programs for ERP, WIP Plus, and WIP, so there is pretty broad discretion at the department in terms of how they implement this program. But again, when I visited with the FSA personnel that are the career people, they basically indicate that they're looking to try to emulate the 2020 program, which is a pretty effective program. It was the program that shot right to you out of Kansas City based on your crop insurance information, it was a pretty efficient program once they stood it up. It won't come encumbered with other crazy stuff that was done in 2020 that made the program a dud. It won't have a progressive factor. It won't have the race and gender stuff. So that stuff is going to be out the window. And I think it'll be a pretty effective program. I guess if I was controlling the pen in this process, I would have said that $21 billion is probably a little bit too much on the disaster side of things. Because if you put it in perspective, the largest disaster program that we've had for a 2-year kind of program has been $10 billion. It's the largest in history. This is almost $21 billion. I would have said that I would like to have put more money into the economic disaster side of things rather than just the production side of things. And I'm kind of hopeful that basically they'll realize that they can't spend that entire $21 billion on disaster, and then they'll legislate to move the rest of it over to the economic side to help producers on the price loss side of things. Implications, obviously I was pretty disappointed that we didn't get the 5-year farm bill done. That thing has been languishing, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Obviously, I am really grateful that Congress, when called upon, acted on $31 billion of assistance to agriculture. That's a pretty big deal. I do think that, and I'm not trying to be partisan here or anything like that, but I think the Democrats overplayed their hand a little bit, because early on in the discussions, basically when it became clear that there were a lot of Aggies in Congress that believed that there needed to be assistance to agriculture, the reaction from the Democratic leadership was, well, what's in it for us? What's in it for Democrats? And I didn't really like that, because obviously a lot of Democrats represent agricultural areas too, and agriculture is not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. And so I was disappointed by that, but I think they overplayed their hand a bit. And I was also disappointed because I was coming home for a funeral, which is never a fun thing to do. And I get in the car with my little nephew, and I read that Ramaswamy and Musk were like not saying very nice things about our package that we had put together on agriculture. But I was relieved that Trump corrected him in a tweet subsequently saying, no, I support all the ag stuff. I just don't like the other stuff. So anyway, so it was a mixed bag, but I was glad that it worked out. And I know this is really important to farmers, that you all get that kind of assistance, because I know that economically things are challenging. So what's going to happen in 25? I'm going to cover some of the boring stuff, and then I'm going to get to the stuff where you really need to focus. So FY25 appropriations. So all you all know, or most of you know, that 12 appropriations bills have to be passed every single year in order to keep the government running. One of those is for agriculture. They were supposed to have gotten the 25 ag appropes done by September 30 of last year. They didn't. They kicked it to December, and then they kicked it to March. I predict they're going to kick it again into May. And I don't know exactly how they're going to resolve that issue on government funding, but I think they're just going to kick the can down the road for a while. Debt ceiling, they're going to do extraordinary measures at the Treasury Department to address that issue. They're not going to use the reconciliation process to raise the debt ceiling. The last that I'd seen is that basically they're looking to maybe tie a debt ceiling solution to the Los Angeles fire relief in hopes that they can pass it that way. Budget reconciliation, which I'll get into in just a second, and Farm Bill. FY26 appropriations, so same as the FY25 thing. No clear path forward there. Lots and lots and lots of unwinding of Biden administration regulations. That's something that Trump can do without having an act of Congress. So it's really super easy. So budget reconciliation, you've probably been reading about this or hearing about this on the news, and it's going to be super important. That's really where it's all going to happen or not happen. But really, the key for you to remember is budget reconciliation does one really important thing. If you run the table and you have the White House and the Senate and the House, you can run anything through the system on a party line vote without needing the other party. And that's really super important, because in the Senate, you need 60 votes to turn the lights on and off, unless you have unanimous consent to do that. And so this reconciliation process lets you pass legislation of huge significance with just a simple majority vote. That's really the key takeaway from budget reconciliation. There are downsides. For example, you can't legislate outside of the 10-year budget window, which is why Trump tax cuts expire. And there are some other things too, but I won't bore you with that. So right now, basically, they're talking about extending the Trump tax cuts and expanding on them. They're talking about doing energy proposals to dominate on energy in the country, doing border proposals, and then also budget cuts. And this is the one key thing that I want you to remember. They're also, maybe not talking about this, but they are definitely eyeing doing a 5-year farm bill as part of this budget reconciliation. And so that's a really very significant thing. On taxes, just think about this for a minute, about all the ramifications of the success of this bill. Stepped up basis, death tax, 199A qualified business deductions, 179 expensing, 100% bonus depreciation, 1031 like-kind exchanges, 20% cap gains tax, apart from the individual rates. That's all that's at stake in this process. All that stuff expires. On budget cuts, they're basically looking at north of $5 trillion in cuts. Fortunately, agriculture is not on that list. But they're looking at Medicaid, Obamacare, welfare reform, SNAP, which is formerly known as food stamps, the student loan bailout, eliminating that, repeal of Biden climate spending, including under IRA. It's kicked off, this process, this budget reconciliation will be kicked off by a budget resolution, but don't get too nervous about that when you see the budget resolution come out, because budget resolutions by themselves are never enacted into law. And so it's really sort of an exercise to basically tee up budget reconciliation. So why does this affect the Farm Bill? In my opinion, I think that the key Democrats on the Agriculture Committee should be working with their key Republican counterparts to develop a bipartisan bill that pluses up the commodity title or the safety net for farmers, pluses up crop insurance as a safety net for producers, and doing some things that don't gore the ox of SNAP, but maybe achieve some savings. And Bozeman and Thompson from the Senate and the House Ag Committees, they tried to do that last year, but a hard line had been driven that there can't be any changes to SNAP. And if you look at that, my numbers may be a little off, but you're looking at like a $1.5 trillion process to authorize this over a 10-year budget window. And about 1.2 to 1.3 is on SNAP. So if you cordon off that and you say you can't touch that, it creates a problem, because basically there are, obviously there are funding needs elsewhere, but in addition to that, there are some members who just feel that the SNAP program needs some modifications or reforms. And so I personally would advise if they were listening to me, I would personally advise that the leaders of the Ag Committee come together on a bipartisan process that makes some meaningful savings on SNAP that are not harmful to the program's beneficiaries, that basically gets the Farm Bill out of the reconciliation process and gets us a bipartisan Farm Bill. I think that's the optimal outcome. I don't think, however, that that's what's going to happen. I think that ultimately we're going to get to budget reconciliation, and there's going to be probably cuts to food stamps to the tune of maybe $200 to $300 billion. And I think the argument that the Republican Aggies are going to make to the leadership of their side, they're going to say, well, listen, you can't cut SNAP like that and then leave us to have to pass a Farm Bill, because then we're going to have two holes to fill. We're going to have to fill the hole that we've been trying to fill for 2 years and putting new money into the commodity title and into crop insurance. Plus, the Democrats are going to demand as a price for their participation that some of the stuff you took away from them is given back. So by default, I think that this Farm Bill is going to wind up in the budget reconciliation process. And the good thing about that is that if the Republicans can get their act together, we can get a 5-year Farm Bill done. The downside of it is that there's a lot of broken glass that happens whenever you try to pass something on a purely partisan basis. It leaves the other side that was left out of the process angry about the situation. So that's the downside of it. And but anyway, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. By the way, some of the other implications of it means that instead of having just a 5-year Farm Bill, you're likely to have a 10-year Farm Bill. And so one of the things that I'm going to urge staff and members is be careful to think about that very carefully, because you need to make for certain that reference prices in the Farm Bill remain relevant over the long haul. Part of the reason why we're in the spot that we're in right now is that reference prices haven't kept up with inflation. The last time we changed reference prices was in 2014, based on 2012 cost of production. And I know that you all know that 2012 cost of production numbers are not very relevant to you today. So I do think that largely that the Farm Bill that would be included in reconciliation will largely mirror what G.T. Thompson produced out of the House Agriculture Committee and what John Bozeman did. Those two measures are very, very similar. It does, so much is riding. If I was Trump, I'd be nervous as a cat about this, and if I was Johnson and Thune, I would be as well. But, there are a fair amount of screwballs on both sides, but there are certainly screwballs that have an outsized power right now in the House. And I don't even know how else to describe them. I should have studied psychiatry rather than law, because I think I would have understood the place a lot better. And I'm not sure if it's a psychosis or neurosis that is the more serious thing, but they've got whatever the most serious thing is. But so lots going to ride on those guys about whether Trump gets any of his agenda through or not. And we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I guess I'll be hopeful that they will, because again, there's so much that is at stake for farmers and agriculture. But it's going to be a tightrope. And I just think about the controversies. Usually tax cuts are pretty easy to pass, at least on the Republican side. But think about all the controversies. Think about, you remember they capped the state and local tax deduction, because they didn't think that the blue states that tax a lot should have balance their books on the federal government's back. And so there's a bunch of Republicans from states like New York who say that deduction, that cap has got to be lifted. The president-elect promised no taxes on Social Security and on tips, and that costs a lot of money. Then there's no program in Washington that somebody doesn't love, so making cuts is never easy. The last time we made cuts to programs in a reconciliation process was back when I was still on the Hill, and back in 2005. And then there is going to be some of if we have a Farm Bill reauthorization, there are some members that just, if there was a bill to eliminate the Farm Bill, they wouldn't vote for it because it's a Farm Bill. So it's not going to be an easy process, and so we're all going to have to buckle up. It's going to be a long, hard slog. If we win, it's going to be a good year for us. So what's in the Thompson-Bozeman measures? Basically, I'm not going to talk about all these things, but basically, there's improvements to the. First of all, there's higher reference prices under PLC and ARC, pretty substantially higher reference prices. Higher loan rates for most commodities, probably not all that significant. I think they should be higher. Very significant increases in loan rate for sugar, for those of you who are growing beets. The ARC program, which I'm not a huge fan of, but anyway, it's a way to, I guess right now it's probably working better than PLC, but they moved that guarantee up from 86% to 90%, and they also increased that payment band from 10% up to 12.5%. This is something that's very significant on dry edible beans. They allow a base update. They compare what you've planted versus what your base is, and then they give you the difference. And that difference can also be made up of non-program crops, like dry edible beans. They'll still pay you on a program crop, the program crops that you produce on your farm aside from dry edible beans, but you'll still be paid on your dry edible bean acreage, which I think is significant. The pay limits are going to be higher. If your farm or if your income is 75% or more based on agricultural production. They double MAP and FMD, which I know is important to beans. This is something that will be very, very significant to you, is they mandate that at least 50% of U.S. food aid actually come from U.S. food, which seems like it should make some common sense, but anyway, and I kind of question why it's not 100%. But anyway, and I think that's one of the areas where this new administration will be really helpful. I think that, I think if Bozeman and Thompson have their way, they're going to want to take some of those climate dollars and shift it to just regular conservation to help you guys implement conservation stuff on the ground. Crop insurance plus-ups. For one thing, as an example, I don't know how many of you are aware of or have used a supplemental coverage option, but it's an area-based coverage that sits on top of your individual coverage. And they're going to increase that, basically the maximum coverage, to 90%. And they're going to put a premium support on it of 80% of the premium will be paid. So it might be something that would be valuable to you going forward if you're sitting at 75% coverage level and you want to get up higher. It might be an inexpensive way to do that. I've been telling, members of Congress, including those, kind of the screwy ones, I'm like, you guys are going to pay for this one way or the other. You guys are going to pay to address the economic situation in farm country. And you can do it one of two ways. When I was in short pants in the 1980s, I watched all these farms go under, and I watched Main Street businesses close. I didn't necessarily know altogether why that was happening, because I wasn't from a farm, but I was from an agricultural community. And Ronald Reagan still to this day has the distinction of passing the most expensive farm bill in the history of the country in 1985. And there was some of you might be old enough to remember pick and roll and all the other stuff that they had to do with the CCC in order to keep farmers in business. And then compare that to when I was counsel on the Agriculture Committee from 1998 to 2002, and basically we saw the train coming through the tunnel, and when corn was under $1 and hogs were 8 cents a pound, and in fact, I remember Dan Glickman was saying that he, in order to try to increase usage of hogs, he thought that basically that these Central American countries that just had a hurricane, that we should just ship them live hogs and fly them down there. And I guess the first question, of course, is, what would they do with all these pigs when they've just been hit by a hurricane? They can't even take care of themselves. And then the second thing is that you fly these pigs down there, how do you get them to put their seats and tray tables in a locked and upright position? But anyway, but from 1998 to 2002, we basically provided economic assistance to producers. And I remember the Wall Street Journal and some other publications that aren't always friendly to ag commenting about how agriculture, the ag economy, is still remaining strong despite low prices. And it's boosting the entire national economy, and it's offsetting the bad hemorrhaging that's going on in the manufacturing sector, which was, if you remember, was losing a lot of jobs. And so that's my message to a lot of members of Congress who probably are not necessarily familiar with farm policy or maybe don't even like it. My message to them is you're going to pay for this one way or the other. And you can either do it the smart way or you can do it the painful way. Trump tariffs. You saw John Thune, Majority Leader, good guy, South Dakota, say, hey, do targeted tariffs, don't do blanket tariffs. You saw the Treasury Secretary tell the Senate this week that he intends to require the Chinese to live up to their phase 1 commitments that they had made under the first Trump administration. John Hoeven, you all will hear me talk about him 1,000 times. He bats 1,000. You're all really fortunate that he is representing you. He has really been on the front lines of protecting that $30 billion authority of the secretary to make for certain that there are payments to producers if there's any kind of retaliation. And I can guarantee you that he and others have already spoken to the president about this, already spoken to Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Ag designate. But you're going to have to stand by producers if this turns into a trade war as we had the last go around, and I know that they're listening to him. Obviously we've had a moribund, dead trade agenda over the last 4 years, and I do expect that Trump is going to want to reinvigorate the trade agenda. Obviously, you guys can't make a decent living off your products if you can't sell them abroad. The challenge is going to be you need trade promotion authority to get a trade agreement through the Congress on an up or down vote. I'm not sure that the votes exist out there. So one of the things is I was just visiting with some of your growers is, Trump is a pretty, you may have noticed, he's kind of a cocksure guy. I think that one of the things that we need to be talking to the administration about is just simply having the president say, name the country, you guys need to buy more U.S. products. And just do that extraneous of any kind of trade agreement. And I think that Trump is the kind of guy who can make that happen. Another thing is maintaining the RAP program. For those of you who don't know what that is, basically Bozeman and Stabenow talked Vilsack into doing a kind of a program that looks a lot like foreign market development and looks a lot like the MAP program, but isn't, and serves a lot of the same purposes, but it had the effect of effectively doubling MAP and FMD spending, which is, by the way, another objective that Thompson and Bozeman want to do is to increase spending on those programs in order to increase exports. Because obviously, again, you guys can't be profitable unless you've got markets to sell your products into. I don't know. Yesterday I made the mistake when I was talking to another group. I left out biofuels, and the first question I got was on biofuels. So I don't know. I guess I'll touch on it real briefly. E15, there was no conspiracy there. They just dropped off extraneous stuff that didn't deal with Farm Bill Extension, CR, disaster aid, economic aid for farmers. I think that ultimately will get done, but they'll keep on doing emergency waivers each summer until it does. RFS volume, you remember, Trump was actually pretty good at setting volumes. but not very good on the small ethanol or the small refinery exemptions. And then Biden was kind of the other way around. He was kind of good on the small refinery exemptions, but not very good on the volume settings. So I'm hoping that Lee Zeldin, the EPA administrator designate, will do a better job. Bozeman talked to him a little bit about that this week, and Bozeman seemed to be encouraged by the answers that he got from Lee Zeldin, who, by the way, is a New York congressman, not particularly associated in my mind with EPA, but I think he'll be generally good for agriculture. And of course, EPA covers so many different things, not just biofuels, but also the crop protection products that you guys need to produce your crop. That's been really pretty much under assault over the last 4 years. So I think he'll be pretty good. The new administration, like I said, I think Trump is going to stick with you guys, which is great. I think Brooke Rollins is getting really good positive reviews from all the senators that she's been meeting that I trust. The fact that she's from a farm in Texas, the fact she went to A&M, the fact that she was in FFA, all tell me congenitally that she's gonna like you guys and stick with you. And I hate to say this because I know the reporters here, and I hope y'all don't. Well, what the heck? But I mean, it's interesting. In 32 years, the worst Secretary of Agriculture and the best Secretary of Agriculture are the same guy, Tom Vilsack. When he was under Obama in the last 6 years, I thought he was really a good secretary, really focused on the mission area of agriculture. And this go around, to try to get him to focus on the bread and butter of agriculture has been extraordinarily challenging. Billions of dollars spent, and none of it manages to hit a full-time farmer. So it's a little frustrating, and I don't say that as a negative comment about him personally. I think he's a decent guy, but it's just been disappointing because, as you guys are dealing with prices where they're at right now, he's got $30 billion in a bank that he could have, he didn't have to get legislation in order to provide help to producers. He could have just done that. That's my unvarnished opinion there. I'm sure I'll regret it tomorrow. So Stephen Vaden, the Deputy Secretary of Ag, good guy. I won't get into him too much, but a good guy, supportive. I feel good about the staff lineup. I saw, you probably saw the announcements. Richard Fordyce is the new FPAC Undersecretary. Luke Lindbergh, who's John Thune's son-in-law, by the way, is the new Trade Undersecretary. Dudley Hoskins is the new Marketing and Regulatory Program Undersecretary, so AMS is under him, and obviously AMS makes a lot of decisions on purchases for dry edible beans, so Dudley's going to be great. So I feel good about the people that they've got coming into the administration, all very, very pro-agriculture. And the landing teams that Trump has put in there, the people that are kind of preparing the way for the appointed people to come in, I also am impressed with that group. Obviously there's been a lot of attention paid to RFK and RFK Jr. And I would just say this on the RFK Jr. thing. No, I'll say two things. One is that basically the senators have been meeting him, have basically walked away saying he's not going to cause us problems. But then if you remember Trump speaking at the Al Smith dinner last fall before the election, he said, RFK Jr. is a good guy, a little crazy, a little out there sometimes. I'm probably going to give him a little bit of a leash, and I'm going to have to rein him in. And I think that's what's going to happen. And the areas, by the way, where that matters, as some of you all know, is that, like dietary guidelines, when the government comes out with that, that's just not an advisory thing. It's just not a meaningless document. That informs, basically how the school lunch program runs and how other governmental nutrition programs run. So it's important, and so we need to make for certain that RFK Jr. does the right thing for agriculture. And like I say, from the senators that I visit with, that I trust, I think that they're going to manage that situation okay. Don't know how much of you use the H-2A program. We can talk about that later. In the interest of time, since I think I'm at my deadline, I'll skip over that for now, but if anybody wants to talk about that, we can. Same with DHS, the Homeland Security issue, and how they handle deportments, agricultural workers. So a few closing thoughts. One is, I remember days in the House when we had leadership in Congress that hated agriculture, didn't like farm bills. We didn't ever get any help from the leadership in passing bills. We had to whip it ourselves. And now you've got a situation where Johnson, the speaker, is pro-agriculture. Scalise, the number 2 guy, pro-agriculture. Emmer from Minnesota, pro-agriculture. Jeffries and Clark and Aguilar, the top 3 Democrats in the House, they're also pro-agriculture. The problem is there's always this friction going on with the food stamp issue, which I would love to have them iron out so that we can get beyond that. Thune, great friend of agriculture. Barrasso from Wyoming, probably not too engaged in agriculture, but has always been generally supportive. Schumer, not good in the House, but he's been supportive of ag in the Senate. Durbin gets a little squirrely in some issues, but generally supportive on ag. Thompson and Bozeman just absolutely knock it out of the park. These guys, the chair of both the Senate and House Ag Committee, really good guys, and not only that, but also just really solid guys. And if you met them, you'd understand why they're so highly regarded on both sides of the aisle. Really well thought of, really just true gentlemen, great guys. And this region of the country is gotten your ship is kind of coming home too, or what's the expression? Your ship is coming in. With Klobuchar and Craig jumping to the top of the rank on the Senate Ag Committee and the House Ag Committee. That's going to be significant. And I think that as a personal matter, I think all 4 of those get along really well. I think they've got a good rapport. So if left alone, I think that they could probably iron out a lot of stuff. That's good for agriculture. But of course, it's not always like that. But I'm looking forward to the new leadership. And again, I really can't say enough about John Hoeven. And on the House Ag, so Hoeven, just so you know, is not only he's next in line to become chairman of Ag, and he's already the chairman of the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee, which controls the purse strings at the department. And maybe not too long in the future where he's chair of both, and that's a huge deal. All senators come into that body created equally, but not all of them, conduct themselves in a manner that causes them to achieve the results that they're looking for. And Hoeven is a master at that. He's really good at handling things right and getting his way. And I will say too, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that when you guys were having rail problems with Mexico on the dry bean issue, Kevin Kramer, who sits on the EPW committee and has jurisdiction over railroads, really went overtime to address that issue and to make for certain that those rail lines were opened again. So anyway, overall, I feel good about the leadership. And like I said, I really do believe that because of this reconciliation process, I think agriculture could really be in a great position by the end of the year. And so that's my hopeful news for you. And I'm just proud to be back in my home area and to be with all of you. So thanks for having me.